Archivist Turin Vale had processed 417 civilizations in 5,200 years. He had welcomed crystal hive minds who sang legal arguments in harmonics that made junior clerks faint. He had recorded the accession of methane-breathing dynasties who measured time in glacial shifts and considered a decade an impulsive decision. He had sat across from species who had forgotten war so completely that their dictionaries no longer contained a word for enemy, and from species who remembered it so vividly they built shrines to peace in the exact dimensions of their old bunkers. He had seen empires rise, soften, fragment, reconcile, and petition for membership under new flags and old names. He had read philosophy packages so dense they required their own compression lattice and cultural histories so self-satisfied he could practically hear the smugness in the punctuation. In all that time, nothing had ever surprised him for long. That was the real measure of age, he had found. Not how much one had seen, but how quickly wonder lost the ability to interrupt procedure. So when the human file landed on his desk, slim and unassuming among a stack of more urgent submissions, he did not even look at it immediately. He finished his notes on the Talari Maritime Dispute Arbitration templates. He signed off on a border language standardization request from a moon colony consortium. He drank half a cup of cold kesh and made a brief mental note that the heater in his office wall still did not work. It had not worked in 73 years. Repairing it would require filing a facilities request, which would lead to an inspection, which would lead to a scheduling delay, which would eventually end in a technician asking whether the unit's age justified replacement rather than repair. Turin had no interest in participating in that conversation. Cold kesh was adequate. It had been adequate for 73 years. Only then did he pull the human file toward him. The folder was light. That was the first thing. Not alarming. Not remarkable. Just light. Most pre-admission cultural packets were swollen with effort. Species on the edge of galactic recognition tended to believe, not incorrectly, that weight implied seriousness. They attached appendices to appendices. They supplied contextual histories, ceremonial transcripts, educational doctrine, poetry samples, conflict resolutions, comparative theology, linguistic caution notes, regional culinary indexes, and occasionally embarrassing quantities of self-congratulation. The humans had submitted all required categories. Technically, Turin flipped to the summary index and paused. 49 mandatory sections completed. Supplemental materials minimal. Cultural attachment sparse. Philosophical framework listed as provisional. Strategic doctrine attachment voluntary, not included. He blinked once, then opened the file properly. Category 3, Foundational Civilizational Identity. The IRI had once answered that category with a 94-page document, 6 maps, and a legal argument. The humans had written one sentence. Still deciding. Ask again in a century. Turin read it twice. Then a third time. He leaned back slightly in his chair and looked, not at the wall, not at the ceiling, but at the narrow space between them where his office lights reflected in the glass partition. His expression did not change. His hand simply remained resting on the page for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned to the next section. Category 8, Dominant Species-Wide Philosophy of Cosmic Purpose. The Vel wrote 42 pages on duty. The Sarum wrote 67 on interdependence. The Keth Conclaves wrote a mathematically indexed set of contradictions that somehow resolved into religion by the final appendix. Humanity had written 5 words. We have not agreed yet. Turin's brow shifted by perhaps a fraction. That was all. He made a small notation in the margin using his private stylus, not the official one. Internal philosophical consensus unresolved. Then, after half a second, he added, no embarrassment indicated. That was the unusual part. Most young species apologized when they were unfinished. They padded their incompleteness with aspiration. They wrapped uncertainty in noble language. Even when they had no answer, they tried to sound like the sort of people who ought to have one soon. These humans had not tried. Turin turned another page. Category 19, Historical Relationship to Organized Violence. That section was usually boring. Civilizations tended to become less interesting the moment they started explaining their past conflicts to outsiders. They used euphemisms. security realignments, resource corrections, necessary internal stabilization, defensive sovereignty assertions. The old shame dressed itself in formal language and hoped no one would notice the blood underneath. Humanity's answer occupied less than half a page. Persistent, regional, industrial, ideological, occasionally global, current trend improving. See attached timeline. Turin stopped. He looked again at the word industrial, then at occasionally global, then at current trend improving. He opened the attached timeline reference. The attachment itself was not included, merely listed for in-person review during delegation arrival. Interesting. He placed one finger lightly against the side of the file. A long time ago, before the Conclave had grown confident in its own permanence, he had learned to pay attention to what people assumed did not require explanation. What a species explained at length told you what it wanted you to think. What it compressed told you what it believed was normal. He turned to category 27. Approach to interspecies conflict mediation. The answer was one line. No direct experience yet. Existing internal models adaptable. Turin's eyes narrowed by a degree so small most beings would not have noticed it. Not none. He read the line again. No direct experience yet. As if interspecies conflict were not a hypothetical but an unopened door, as if they were not claiming innocence, merely a lack of current opportunity, as if somewhere beneath the neat administrative phrasing there sat a species calmly informing the galaxy that while they had not done this specific thing before, they did not expect the learning curve to be significant. He made another private notation. Linguistic irregularity. Possibly translation artifact. He hesitated, then added, review in person. Outside his office window, the Conclave archive spires glowed amber in the late cycle light. Transports crossed the upper lanes in orderly silence. Somewhere down the corridor, a clerk laughed too loudly at something that could not possibly have been that funny, then cut herself off when she realized where she was. Turin flipped through the remaining sections. Technology level, advancing, governance structure, recently consolidated, colonial footprint, limited but active. Military posture, defensive by stated doctrine. Observer status request rationale. Participation, access, mutual study. Mutual study. Another phrase that did not ask for approval so much as announce intent. By the time he reached the end of the file, his cup of kesh was empty and fully cold, though that had ceased to matter centuries ago. He sat for a moment with the folder closed beneath his palm. It was not an impressive submission. That, in itself, was impressive. No ornamental confidence. No pleading. No hunger in the language. No effort to flatter the institution they were petitioning to enter. Just concise answers, incomplete consensus, and the sort of understated phrasing that either indicated immaturity or a very specific kind of self-possession. Turin had catalogued 417 civilizations. He had seen arrogance, he had seen feared, he had seen desperate species trying to sound ancient and ancient species trying to sound gentle. This felt like none of those. He opened the file one last time and returned to the first page, where the species designation sat plain and unadorned. Humanity, origin world, Earth, status requested, observer, delegation arrival in 18 days. Turin looked at the date. Then he looked back at the file. For the first time in longer than he cared to calculate, he had the faint, unwelcome sensation that something important had just entered the room quietly enough to avoid being announced. He closed the folder, placed it on top of the rest instead of inside the stack. And without quite knowing why, he did not file it away. The transport descended through cloud layers that refused subtlety. Turin had seen green worlds before. Many of them. Some had been engineered to impress, vast curated ecosystems arranged in perfect geometric harmony. Some had been wild, but restrained by climate or gravity or the slow patience of evolution. Green, in his experience, tended toward balance. Toward a certain moderation. Earth was not moderate. From orbit it had looked excessive. From the atmosphere, it felt insistent. The vegetation did not simply exist. It pressed. It climbed. It spread across every surface that would tolerate it and many that would not. The forests did not form neat boundaries. They spilled over terrain like something that had never learned restraint. Even the agricultural zones, which should have been orderly, carried a sense of density that made the planet feel crowded with life. Turin made no official note of this. In his private journal, he wrote one line: "The biosphere does not yield space easily." He closed the journal before the transport fully stabilized. The city below resolved into sharp detail as they approached. Angled roofs, waterways, stone structures interwoven with modern materials. It was not the largest human population center, nor the most technologically advanced. It had been chosen, according to the briefing, for its historical significance. Geneva, a place where humans had come, repeatedly, to negotiate peace with each other. Turin found that detail mildly interesting. Not the existence of such a place. Many species had cities associated with reconciliation. What interested him was the implication of repetition. They had needed such a place often enough for it to matter. The transport touched down with minimal vibration. Human engineering favored redundancy and stability over elegance. The descent had been smooth, but not silent. There had been a low, constant hum beneath the structure, like something working harder than it needed to, just in case. When the hatch opened, the air carried warmth and moisture and the faint, layered scent of plant life and human activity. Not unpleasant. Not entirely clean either. Alive. The reception team was already waiting. They stood in a loose formation, not rigid, not ceremonial. Functional spacing. Clear lines of movement between them. Turin noticed that without appearing to. The lead diplomat stepped forward. Adarachin. Her file had described her as experienced, mid-career, highly effective in multilateral negotiation environments. The description had been precise and unremarkable. In person, she was something else. Not physically imposing. Not decorated. No visible insignia of rank. Her clothing was simple, dark, tailored without ornamentation. If one did not know who she was, one might have mistaken her for support staff. Turin had learned long ago that this was rarely accidental. She extended her hand. He had prepared for this. The gesture had been documented extensively. He mirrored it with practiced accuracy. Her grip was firm. Not aggressively so, but deliberate. The pressure was enough to register clearly, to confirm presence. Her skin was warm. The contact lasted just long enough to establish something, then ended cleanly. She held his gaze. 3 seconds, perhaps slightly more. Turin was aware of the exact duration because he had been trained to be aware of such things. It was not a challenge. Not quite. But it was not passive either. Then she smiled. The moment dissolved. "Welcome to Earth," she said. Her tone was even. No excess enthusiasm. No visible strain. The words carried the shape of hospitality without the weight of performance. "Thank you," Turin replied. They began moving toward the transport corridor. He noted as they walked that the human delegation matched his pace without appearing to adjust for it. A small thing. Many species either overcompensated for guests or failed to adjust at all. Humans seemed to align movement naturally, as if they had done this many times before. Which, of course, they had. The vehicle that carried them into the city was enclosed, transparent along the upper arc. The route had been chosen, he suspected, to provide visibility. He watched the city pass. People moved along the walkways in steady flows. Not chaotic. Not perfectly ordered. There was a rhythm to it, an underlying coordination that did not rely on visible direction. Individuals adjusted to each other without signaling, avoiding collision through subtle shifts in movement. Adaptive flow. He filed the observation without writing it down. Buildings varied in age and design. Some were centuries old, preserved with careful attention. Others were recent, constructed with modern materials but fitted into existing spaces rather than replacing them entirely. Layered history. Nothing unusual. Except, he noticed, in the older structures especially, a pattern. Entrances positioned with clear sightlines, windows elevated or angled, interior spaces that seemed larger than necessary. He said nothing. The vehicle stopped at a large stone building near the water. "This is the chamber we'll be using," Adara said. Turin inclined his head. From the outside, It appeared consistent with the architectural period it was attributed to. No visible modifications. No obvious security additions. Inside, it was different. The chamber was expansive, far larger than required for the number of attendees. The ceiling rose high above, supported by pale stone arches. Light entered from windows placed near the top of the walls, circling the room so that illumination was evenly distributed. There were no shadows deep enough to conceal movement. Trinh stepped fully inside. For doors. One in each wall. Equidistant. He paused just long enough to register it. No seat in the chamber was more than a short distance from an exit. No position lacked visibility of at least 2 entry points. The elevated windows prevented external approach without exposure. A human staff member noticed his brief hesitation. "It's an old structure," she said, offering the explanation without prompting. 18th century. We preserved it. Trinh inclined his head again. Of course. He walked further into the room. In his private journal, later, he would write, "The chamber is not optimized for discussion." Then, after a pause, "It is optimized for survival during discussion." He did not include that in the official report. The seating arrangement was already in place. Balanced. Symmetrical. No position of obvious dominance. No raised platform. The conclave preferred neutrality in its physical spaces, and the humans had adhered to that expectation with careful precision. Too careful, perhaps. Adara gestured toward his assigned position. "We thought this would be appropriate," she said. He examined it briefly. Clear view of all entrances. No obstruction to movement, proximity to exit within acceptable parameters. "Yes," he said. "This will be suitable." She nodded once, as if confirming something beyond his words. Preparations continued around them. Staff moved quietly, adjusting placements, verifying equipment, coordinating timing. There was no visible tension, but there was no looseness either. Every motion had purpose, even when it appeared casual. Trinh watched them for a moment. Then he sat. The proceedings themselves would be straightforward. They always were. Formalities had a way of smoothing over uncertainty, of providing structure where meaning had yet to settle. But as he sat in that oversized room with its 4 doors and its deliberate light, he found himself returning, unbidden, to the file. To 5 words. "We have not agreed yet." And to 2. "None yet." He folded his hands in his lap. Across the chamber, Adara spoke quietly with one of her staff. She listened more than she talked. When she did speak, the others adjusted immediately, not out of deference, but alignment. Trinh had seen command expressed in many ways. This was not dominance. This was cohesion. He did not write that down. Not yet. The formal session proceeded exactly as expected. That was the first thing that unsettled him. Not because anything went wrong. Because nothing did. After 5,000 years, Trinh had learned that true anomalies rarely announce themselves during structured moments. They waited. They aligned themselves with normality so precisely that they became indistinguishable from it, until they weren't. The chamber filled gradually. Representatives took their seats with the practiced ease of beings accustomed to ritual. Some arrived early, projecting eagerness. Others arrived just late enough to signal confidence. A few, older species, arrived precisely when the session began, which conveyed something closer to indifference. The humans arrived exactly on time. Not a second before. Not a second after. Trinh noted it without looking directly at them. Precision as communication. He had seen it before, though rarely. It required intention. Timing was one of the few signals that could not be faked without coordination, and coordination implied awareness. The session opened. He delivered the standard conclave recitation. The words had not changed in over 9,000 years. They did not need to. Their purpose was not to inform, but to stabilize. To remind everyone in the room that this process had weight, history, continuity. He spoke them without error. He always did. When he finished, Adara Chin stood. Her speech was concise. Gratitude expressed without embellishment. Intent stated without overreach. No attempt to impress. No rhetorical flourish designed to elevate humanity beyond its current status. She did not ask for trust. She did not promise alignment. She simply described their presence. "We are here to learn how this works," she said at one point. The phrasing was simple. It should have sounded like humility. It didn't. Turin felt the distinction before he understood it. Learn how this works. Not be taught. Not be guided. Learn. As if the system itself were something to be studied, mapped, understood. As if they intended to figure it out regardless of what they were told. He kept his expression neutral. The vote was procedural. Observer status granted. No objections raised. No debate extended beyond standard parameters. Humanity was classified, filed, admitted to the outer layer of conclave structure. Acknowledged presence. Nothing more. Nothing less. The session closed. Applause followed. Polite. Measured. Appropriate. The humans accepted it with the same controlled professionalism they had maintained throughout. No visible relief. No visible triumph. Just acknowledgement. Turin had seen species celebrate observer status as if it were victory. The humans treated it like a step. The reception began shortly after. Food, drink, informal exchange. The secondary ritual where real impressions were formed beneath the surface of official language. Turin moved through it as he always did. Measured pace. Brief conversations. Enough engagement to gather data, not enough to become involved. He spoke with a VEL envoy about trade corridors. With a Serum cultural analyst about language integration protocols. With a junior human researcher who seemed slightly overwhelmed but hid it well. All normal. All predictable. Until he reached the far wall. He had not intended to stop there. The display extended the length of the reception hall, set slightly apart from the main flow of conversation. It was not highlighted. No signs drew attention to it. It simply existed, available to be seen by anyone who chose to look. At first he did not. Then, passing close enough, his vision caught on a pattern. Lines. Dates. Density. He slowed. Turned slightly. And read. It was a timeline. Human history, arranged linearly from earliest recorded civilization to present. That, in itself, was not unusual. Many species presented such timelines during first contact events. It was a way of demonstrating progress. Of showing how far they had come. This one did that. Technological advancement marked clearly. Agricultural development. Industrialization. Early spaceflight. Off-world expansion. All expected. What was not expected was everything in between. Turin's gaze moved slowly from left to right. Conflicts. They were everywhere. Not highlighted. Not hidden. Just present. Continuous. One ended, another began. Sometimes overlapping. Sometimes branching into multiple regions simultaneously. There were periods where the intensity lessened, where the markers grew smaller, less dominant. But they never disappeared. There was no true gap. No point at which the species as a whole had been entirely at peace with itself. Turin stopped reading. He did not step back. He did not move closer. He simply stood. 11 seconds. He would later measure it, though he did not know why. 11 seconds of stillness in the middle of a reception filled with quiet conversation and the soft clink of glass. The humans had put this here. Not in a restricted archive. Not in an academic appendix. In the welcome hall. For the conclave delegation to see. He glanced, briefly, at the people around him. Human staff moved through the room with the same calm efficiency as before. They spoke, they listened, they coordinated. None of them looked at the display. None of them avoided looking at it either. It was simply no pride. No shame. No attempt to explain. This is what happened. You should know. Turin's mind moved through classification options automatically. Cultural transparency. Possible misjudgment of external perception. Translation artifact. He discarded each one. They did not fit. He reached out, not touching the display, but close enough to see the finer details. Casualty estimates. Resolution notes. Occasional annotations. Treaties. Ceasefires. Reformations. Repeats. The pattern was not random. It was persistent. He stepped back. picked up a glass from a nearby tray without looking at what it contained. Something cool. Amber. He did not taste it. He stood near one of the high windows and looked out over the city. Lights reflected off water. Movement continued below. The world did not pause for the realization forming in his mind. He searched for a category, for a framework, for a way to reduce what he had just seen into something manageable. He found none. In his official report, later, he would write, historical timeline displayed. High frequency of internal conflict noted. Cultural normalization of conflict appears significant. No immediate external implications. He would tag it, cultural dissonance. Low priority. He would move on. Now, standing by the window, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not surprise. Not yet. Something closer to a resistance. As if his mind had encountered a shape that did not fit the space available for it. He finished the drink without remembering doing so, set the glass aside, and returned to the flow of the reception as if nothing had happened. Across the room, Adara-chan caught his eye briefly. Just a moment. 3 seconds, perhaps. Then she looked away. The moment passed. Smooth. Professional. Unremarkable. And for reasons he could not yet articulate, Trin knew with quiet certainty that he had just missed something important. He did not know what. He did not know why. He only knew that the file he had closed too quickly had not been empty, and that the wall he had just read was not decoration. The return journey took 6 days. Trin finished the human file in 4 hours. He did not go back to it. That later would bother him, but at the time, it felt appropriate. The file had been simple, direct, lacking depth in places where depth was expected, but complete within the formal requirements. There was nothing in it that demanded revision, nothing that required escalation. He had processed far more complex civilizations in less time. The remaining days of the journey settled into familiar rhythm. Review old records. Cross-reference classifications. Maintain continuity of thought. It was a habit formed over millennia, one that required no conscious effort. Some beings listened to music to calm themselves. Trin read old files. Species 112, the Orin Collective. Distributed cognition across a planetary fungal network. Peaceful. Slow to respond. Required adjusted communication intervals. Species 204, the VEC. Post-conflict civilization. Strong legal frameworks. Residual cultural rigidity in matters of territorial integrity. Species 319, the Thalen. Aquatic. No history of internal war. Highly cooperative social structures. Limited adaptability under rapid environmental stress. He read them without focus. Not searching for anything. Just maintaining the pattern. The human file remained closed. He did not think about the timeline. He did not think about none yet. He did not think about the room with 4 doors. When the transport docked, he resumed his work immediately. The archive welcomed him back with quiet efficiency. Data streams updated. Pending files queued. Requests flagged by priority. He sat, opened a new report, and began writing. His assessment of humanity was precise. It was thorough. It was wrong. Planetary classification, biosphere dense. High biodiversity. Stable climate systems within acceptable fluctuation ranges. Governance. Unified global structure. Recent consolidation. Long-term stability undetermined. Technology, advanced. Faster than light capable. Limited interstellar infrastructure. Cultural development, transitional. Philosophical framework incomplete. Internal consensus unresolved. Behavioral tendencies, competitive. Goal-oriented. Strong intragroup bonding. Adaptive under pressure. Threat assessment, not required. Recommendation, standard monitoring protocol. No expedited attention necessary. He wrote it cleanly. No hesitation. No revisions. He sealed the file. Submitted it to the Conclave archive. And moved on. The next file was easier. Species 418. A small, quiet civilization from a low radiation system. Agricultural. Non-competitive. No history of large-scale conflict. Their documentation was thorough, if somewhat repetitive. They had included extensive material on their irrigation techniques, which Tern skimmed with mild interest. Predictable. Categorize. Complete. He worked for several hours without interruption. Only when he paused, briefly, to pour himself another cup of kesh did the thought return. Not fully formed. Not insistent. Just present. He stood at the small preparation counter in his office. The heating element still did not function. He poured the liquid anyway. Cold. As expected. He returned to his desk. Saturday. Picked up the cup. And stopped. The timeline. It appeared without invitation. Not the full image. Just the pattern. No gaps. He set the cup down. Reaching, almost absently, he pulled the human file back out of the archive queue. He did not open it. He simply held it. There was a particular way one held something when deciding whether it belonged in immediate reach or long-term storage. This was that way. His fingers rested along the edge of the folder. So, the archive around him continued its quiet work. Data moved. Systems processed. Other archivists spoke in low tones along distant corridors. Normal. Everything was normal. He thought about the phrasing. None yet. Not none. He thought about the handshake. The eye contact. 3 seconds. Not dominance. Not submission. Something else. He thought about the room. For doors. Equal spacing. Clear sight lines. Not built for discussion. Built for what happens when discussion fails. He exhaled slowly. And then, with deliberate motion, he placed the file back into the archive queue. Filed. Complete. He picked up his kesh. Drank it. Cold. Unchanged. And forced his attention back to the present. The next species required classification. The next report required completion. The system functioned because it continued. Because it did not pause for uncertainty. He did not think about Earth again. Not for a long time. When he did, it would not be because he chose to. It would be because something had happened. Something that made the file he had written clean, precise, professional, insufficient in a way that could not be ignored. But for now, the archive remained orderly. The categories remained intact. And humanity was exactly what he had said it was. Nothing more. Nothing less. Liara Valen had always believed that violence was a temporary condition. It was not a belief she had arrived at independently. It had been taught to her before she was old enough to question it, reinforced every year after that, embedded so deeply into her education that it felt less like an idea and more like a law of nature. Violence is what a species does before it learns better. It was written above the entrance to every major institution on her home world. It was the first principle of the Salhari Conclave curriculum. It was, as far as she had ever known, correct. Advanced civilizations did not fight. They might have once, long ago. In the early stages, before they understood the cost. Before they developed systems that made conflict inefficient, unnecessary, obsolete. But they grew out of it. They all did. The Salhari had done so 800 years ago. They considered themselves average in that regard. Some species had achieved it earlier. Some later. But all of them, eventually, set violence down the way you set down a tool you no longer needed. That was the model. That was the framework. That was what Liara had believed without hesitation. Until she opened the human file. She had been assigned to the Humanities Xenobiological Assessment as a standard follow-up to their observer admission. It was routine work. Important, but not urgent. The kind of assignment given to researchers who were competent, efficient, and not currently engaged in anything requiring immediate attention. She had packed for 3 weeks. She would remain on Earth for 8 months. The first file she opened was skeletal structure. She read it in the morning. A small office. Temporary allocation. 1 window. The sound of unfamiliar birds outside, sharp and irregular. The scent of something bitter and stimulating in the air. A human beverage she had begun consuming out of curiosity and had continued consuming out of habit. She had not intended to like it. She had not intended to need it. She read the report once. Then again. Then a third time, slower. The density was the first anomaly. Human bone structure was heavier than expected for a species of their size and gravity environment. Not excessively so, not outside theoretical possibility, but unusual. She searched for the explanation. Gravity did not fully account for it. She dug deeper. The distribution was uneven. The long bones of the legs, reinforced. Joints, thickened. Hands and forearms, structurally dense. Marrow cavities, large. Very large. She paused. Ran the numbers again. The marrow capacity suggested something specific. Blood production. Sustained oxygen delivery. Endurance. She leaned back in her chair. Looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then back at the file. This was not a structural compromise. It was a design. Not intentional, of course. Evolution was not intentional. But it was directional. Something had pushed this species, over time, toward a body that could continue functioning beyond normal limits. She opened a new document. Notes. Human skeletal structure indicates adaptation toward sustained physical output beyond baseline exhaustion thresholds. She stopped typing. Looked at the sentence. Then added. Requires contextual explanation. She underlined it. Twice. The next file was muscle composition. She already knew the basics. All species develop some variation of fast-twitch and slow-twitch muscle fibers. The ratio depended on ecological niche. Predators built for speed had fast-twitch dominance. Migratory or endurance-based species had slow-twitch. Balance existed, but it tended toward one or the other. Humans did not tend. They accumulated. The data was clear. Both fiber types were present in significant, functional quantities. Not a compromise. Not a median. A coexistence. A body capable of explosive motion and sustained exertion. Not in theory. In practice. She stared at the distribution charts. Ran comparisons. Cross-referenced with conclave baseline species. There was no direct equivalent. Nothing matched this pattern cleanly. She wrote, dual optimization present. Statistically uncommon. Functional implications unclear. She paused again. Then, beneath it, what ecological pressure produces this? She sat with that question for several minutes. There should have been an answer. There was always an answer. Evolution did not create redundancies without reason. Every trait existed because it had been selected. Over and over. Across generations. Until it became standard. She closed the file. Opened the next. Pain response. She expected variation. She did not expect this. Baseline tolerance levels across conclave species fell within predictable ranges. Differences existed, but they were bounded. Pain, at sufficient intensity, disrupted function. It had to. That was its purpose. To prevent further damage. To force cessation. Humans followed this model. Technically. The threshold, however. She read the data. Then read it again. Then opened 3 additional studies from different sources. The numbers aligned. Human pain tolerance was significantly elevated. Not uniformly. Not universally. But consistently enough to be characteristic. She found case studies. Individuals continuing activity after severe injury. Fractures. Lacerations. Systemic trauma. Not because they were unaware. Because they chose to continue. She stopped reading. Turned slightly in her chair. Looked out the window. The birds were still there. Unfamiliar. Unconcerned. She pressed her fingers lightly against the surface of the desk. Every species has a limit. A point at which the body overrides intent. Stops. Protects. Forces stillness. Humans had that point. They simply negotiated with it. She turned back to the screen. Opened a new note. Pain response threshold elevated. Behavioral override present in a significant percentage of observed individuals. She hesitated. Then added. Limits appear flexible. She did not like the phrasing. It was imprecise. But nothing more precise presented itself. By the end of the second week, her notes had begun to accumulate. By the end of the first month, they had begun to connect. By the end of the second month, she understood that she was no longer confirming a model. She was challenging one. She had a conversation with her assigned liaison on the 63rd day. Dr. Peter Havel. Marine biologist. Human. He had been helpful. Informative. Casual in a way that made complex things sound ordinary. She described what she had found. Carefully. Without interpretation. He listened. Nodded. Did not appear surprised. That sounds about right, he said. She looked at him. You are not concerned, she said. He shrugged slightly. It's just how we're built. She studied his face. No defensiveness. No pride. Just acknowledgement. There is a theory, he added, after a moment. You might want to look into it. Persistence hunting. She had not encountered the term. He explained. Early humans. Not fast. Not strong compared to their prey. But capable of something else. They did not chase. They followed. Hours. Half a day. The distance. The prey would run. So, run again. Eventually, it would collapse. Not from injury. From exhaustion. The human would still be there. Still moving. Still coming. She listened. Said nothing. He took another bite of his meal. Completely at ease with the explanation. As if describing weather. So, she said slowly, you hunted by continuing. Pretty much. How long ago? He considered. Couple million years, give or take. She nodded. Did not write anything down. Not yet. That night she reviewed her notes. Bone density. Muscle composition. Pain tolerance. Endurance. Stress response data still pending. She stared at the page. The pattern was forming. It was not complete, but it was directional. She had started this assignment expecting to document a developing species. Something transitional. Something unfinished. Instead, she was beginning to see something that did not fit the model at all. Not unfinished. Not primitive. But different. She closed the file. Turned off the light. And sat in the darkness for a while, listening to a planet that did not know it was being studied. For the first time since she had begun her work, she felt a small, persistent unease. Not fear. Not yet. Something quieter. Something like standing at the edge of an explanation that did not want to resolve. The neurology files arrived in her 4th month. Liera opened them at the start of the day. She did not close them until it ended. 11 hours passed. She noticed only because the light outside the window changed from morning clarity to the dim, diffuse glow of evening, and at some point the unfamiliar birds stopped making noise. She did not move. She read. Every species had a stress response. That was foundational. The mechanism varied, chemical, electrical, hormonal, but the principle was universal. When faced with immediate danger, the body shifted. Focus narrowed. Energy redirected. Non-essential processes reduced or shut down. Everything aligned toward survival. It was an old system. Efficient. Predictable. Liera had studied dozens of variations across conclave species. She knew the patterns. She knew the limits. Humans followed the pattern. Up to a point. She read the first report. Then the second. Then the third. Different research teams. Different methodologies. Different decades. The same conclusion. Under acute stress, human physiology entered a heightened state. That was expected. What was not expected was what happened next. Time perception shifted. That existed in other species. Not unusual. Processing speed increased. Also documented elsewhere. Still within acceptable variance. But the accounts. She paused on one. A human describing a life-threatening incident. I remember everything being very clear. Not fast. Like all the extra noise just stopped. She moved to another. I knew exactly what to do. There wasn't any confusion. It was simple. Another. No panic. Just focus. Liera leaned back slightly. Scrolled further. She began isolating keywords. Clarity. Focus. Simple. Fin. Clarity. Fin. Not fear. Not panic. Not overload. Clarity. She felt something shift in her understanding. Slowly. Reluctantly. The stress response, in most species, degraded decision-making at extreme thresholds. It was effective for immediate survival behaviors, but it reduced complexity, narrowed cognition, forced instinct over analysis. Humans did not seem to degrade. They refined. Under conditions that should have overwhelmed them, they described increased precision. She pulled comparative data, cross-referenced, confirmed. No conclave species exhibited this pattern at this intensity. None. She opened a new document. Human stress response appears to enhance cognitive clarity under extreme conditions. She stopped. Read the sentence. Deleted enhance. Human stress response correlates with reported increases in perceived cognitive clarity under extreme conditions. More precise. Still insufficient. She stared at the screen. Then added, subjective reports consistent across multiple independent studies. She paused again. Then, after a long moment, further investigation required. She did not like that either. It was too small, too contained. What she was looking at did not feel like something that required investigation. It felt like something that required reconsideration. She pushed that thought aside. Returned to the data. There were additional notes. Physiological markers. Adrenaline spikes. Neurochemical changes. Standard. Then anomalies. Sustained function beyond expected limits. Decision-making under severe injury. Coordination maintained under conditions that should disrupt it. She read one report twice. A human subject with multiple injuries continuing to perform complex tasks for several minutes before seeking assistance. Not because assistance was unavailable, because the task was not finished. She sat very still. Every species had a limit, a point at which the body said stop, a point at which the system protected itself. Humans had that point, but they did not seem to treat it as absolute. They treated it as negotiable. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, returned to the screen, continued reading. By the time she reached the final file, something in her had shifted from curiosity to something else. Something she still did not have a clean word for. She forwarded excerpts to 3 colleagues. No commentary. Just data. She waited. The responses came within hours. Measurement error. Statistical anomaly. Incomplete sampling. She read them. Then replied with 14 study references. Different teams. Different time frames. Consistent results. She did not receive further responses. That night, she did not leave her office immediately. She sat. The files open in front of her. The window dark. The room quiet. She thought about the model. Violence is what a species does before it learns better. She had believed that. Entirely. Without question. Now she was looking at something that complicated it. Not contradicted. Complicated. Because what she was seeing was not a species that had not yet learned. It was a species that had learned something else entirely. She opened the war records in her 6th month. She had avoided them. Not consciously, but consistently. The timeline from Geneva had remained in the back of her thoughts, unresolved. Now she addressed it directly. She approached it methodically. Data. Patterns. Frequency. Causation. She did not judge. She categorized. Conflicts mapped across time. Early tribal engagements. Territorial disputes. Resource conflicts. Ideological wars. Industrial-scale warfare. Global conflicts. Repeated. Overlapping. Escalating. Then resolving. Then repeating again. She tracked the technology. Stone. Metal. Chemical. Mechanical. Digital. Energy-based. She tracked casualties. Numbers grew. Then stabilized. Then grew again. She tracked outcomes. Negotiation. Exhaustion. Total loss. Partial resolution. Cycle continuation. She read for days. Not continuously, but persistently. Each session adding another layer. Another pattern. Another piece. She asked a single question. Not out loud. Not written. How does a species survive this? She did not expect an answer. She found one anyway. It arrived slowly. Unwelcome. The species survived because the ones who did not survive were removed. She sat with that. For a long time. No emotion. Just observation. If a species exists under constant conflict, then the individuals who are less capable of surviving that conflict do not persist. Those who endure, who continue, who adapt, they remain, they reproduce, they pass those traits forward. Not intentionally, not deliberately, but inevitably. Over time, over thousands of years, the species changes, not away from violence, through it. She opened a new document, did not type, just stared. Then carefully she wrote, "Humanity has not evolved past violence." She stopped. Read the sentence. Then continued, "Humanity has evolved through it." She sat back. The words felt correct. Incomplete, but correct. She added nothing else. Closed the document. Saved it. Appendix. Not conclusion. Not yet. Outside, the night remained quiet. Her home world had been quiet for 800 years. The Conclave had been quiet for 9,000. Humanity had not been quiet until very recently. Geologically speaking, last week. She looked at her hands. At the slight tension in them she had not noticed until now. Then she leaned back in her chair and turned off the screen. For the first time since she had begun her research, she understood something clearly. The model was not wrong. It was incomplete. And what it did not account for was standing on a planet that had never truly stopped fighting long enough to forget how. She sat in the dark a little longer, then finally stood, and left the office. Commander though Val had studied war for 60 years. He had never fought one. This had never been considered a problem. Among the Conclave, it was not unusual. It was, in fact, the standard. War existed in archives, in simulations, in carefully preserved historical records, studied with the same detached precision one might apply to extinct ecosystems. You learned it. You analyzed it. You did not expect to experience it. Though Val understood strategy, he understood logistics, formation theory, engagement sequencing, resource allocation under contested conditions. He could recite, from memory, the decisive moments of conflicts that had ended thousands of years before his species joined the Conclave. He could explain why they had unfolded the way they did, where errors had been made, where advantages had been lost or exploited. He understood war the way a surgeon understood anatomy. Completely, abstractly, without blood. The Drawl, his people, had been the last of the major Conclave species to lay war down. 20,000 years of conflict. Then, slowly, deliberately, they had set it aside. Not forgotten. Never forgotten. But contained. Redirected. The military remained. It had purpose. Peacekeeping. Disaster response. Escort for deep space operations. Useful work. Necessary work. Clean work. Though Val had built his career within that structure, he was good at it. Very good. His assessments were precise. His projections accurate. His confidence, until recently, absolute. The CRE Dominion did not announce itself. That was the first deviation. Conclave protocol for conflict was not optional. It was foundational. You made contact. You declared your grievance. You waited. Even hostile actions followed structure. Even aggression respected sequence. It was what prevented escalation. What maintained stability. For 9,000 years, it had worked. The CRE did not make contact. They did not declare. They did not wait. They crossed the Conclave border at 17 points simultaneously. Though Val was in his office when the first alert arrived, he read it once. Then again. Then opened the secondary feeds. 17 systems. 12 inhabited. 5 auxiliary. Surrounded. Communication disrupted. Status uncertain. He stood. The room around him felt smaller. Not physically. Conceptually. The models he had spent his life refining did not include this. Not because it was impossible. Because it had not been necessary. The second report arrived before he could finish processing the first. Annexation declared. The word was clean. Administrative. It suggested transfer. Control. Authority. What it meant was that 17 systems had been taken. Without negotiation. Without warning, 3 of the stations attempted formal protest. Though Val read the transcripts. Structured. Precise. Correct. The CRE did not respond. 14 days. 17 systems. Gone. The conclave convened. Emergency session. Though Val stood before the council and delivered his assessment, he did not rush. He did not dramatize. He spoke as he had been trained. The conclave fleet was capable. Reduced in size, yes. Peace allowed for reduction. But modern. Maintained. Crewed by professionals. Effective. He paused. Just briefly. Untested. He did not emphasize that. Not enough. He should have. The room absorbed his report. Questions followed. Clarifications. Timelines. He answered all of them. He believed at that moment that the situation was manageable. Complex. Serious. But within parameters. The human message arrived on the second day. It came through the observer channel. Administrative. Not intended for this kind of communication. It was addressed to 7 recipients. The 6 members of the Security Council. And though Val directly. He opened it. 11 words. We would like to help. Please advise on how to coordinate. He read it once. Then again. No elaboration. No justification. No positioning. Just intent. The council debated. For hours. Arguments were made. No treaty obligation. Observer status only. No formal integration. For 40 ships within range. Conclave fleet stretched thin. Additional assets useful. Though Val listened. Contributed when required. Remained neutral. In the end, authorization was granted. Not because it would change the outcome. Because it might help. A gesture. A contribution. 40 ships. Insufficient to alter a 17-system incursion. Though Val sent the coordination parameters. Standard protocol. Engagement boundaries. Communication frequencies. Hold position until main fleet arrival. He expected compliance. The first engagement occurred 3 days later. System Vethkalos. Mid-range. 2 inhabited stations. 1 conclave garrison. 8 ships. Surrounded. Distress signal active. Though Val's fleet was 6 hours out. Human squadron arrival, 40 minutes. He transmitted the data. Hold position. Await reinforcement. Response came quickly. Understood. We will wait. He acknowledged. Returned to his calculations. Adjusted arrival sequences. Projected engagement outcomes. Then the signal changed. He heard it before he saw it. The shift in tone. Frequency alteration. He froze for half a second. Boarding. The garrison was preparing for boarding. The CRE were escalating. Though Val recalculated. 6 hours. Too long. He opened a channel. Prepared to issue updated instructions. Another message arrived. Garrison is being boarded. We are going in. Not a request. Not a question. A statement. He inhaled sharply. Opened his mouth to respond. The response was irrelevant. The human squadron had already moved. He turned to the tactical display. The ships appeared on the edge of the system. Vector flagged low probability. He noted that. Filed it. Then set it aside. They did not broadcast a challenge. That was wrong. Protocol required declaration. Intent. Engagement acknowledgement. It prevented miscalculation. It established order. They did not establish order. They attacked. Directly. Immediately. The CRE responded. Efficiently. They were not unprepared for conflict. Just unprepared for this. The human ships moved differently. Not elegant. Not precise in the way Conclave doctrine defined precision. They were aggressive. Angles that should have been irrelevant were covered. Weapon systems fired from positions that doctrine did not prioritize. The formation shifted rapidly. Adaptively. Not following a pattern though Val recognized. He leaned forward. Studying. Trying to map it. The first human ship took a direct hit. Severe. Port propulsion array compromised. In any conclave fleet, that ship would withdraw. Signal damage. Reposition. Await assessment. The human ship did not withdraw. It continued forward. Though Val checked the telemetry. Confirmed damage. Significant. He opened the internal feed. Humans moved through the corridors. Under fire. Manual rerouting. Physical intervention. Compensating. Maintaining thrust. The ship took a second hit. Less severe. Still damaging. It did not stop. It adjusted. Continued. Though Val sat back slightly. His mind attempted to categorize what he was seeing. It did not fit. The engagement continued. The human ships drew the CRE inward. Not intentionally, but intentionally. He saw it. The pattern. Damage was not avoidance. It was bait. The CRE pursued. Compressed formation. Focused on weakened targets. Correct response. Standard. The human ships slowed just enough. Maintained engagement. Held attention. Then the flanking units moved. Simultaneously. Closing. Encircling. The formation collapsed. Though Val stared at the display, he pulled historical records. Searched. Found it. Ancient. Primitive. 2,000 years before human spaceflight. Same principle. Different scale. Identical logic. He sat in silence. The garrison survived. The CRE withdrew. The system held. Though Val did not move for several seconds. Then he requested a full tactical breakdown. He needed to understand. Not just what had happened. Why it had worked. Hours later, reviewing the data, the answer was clear. The humans had not followed doctrine. They had followed outcome. They had accepted damage as part of the maneuver. Not as failure. As function. He leaned back in his chair. Looked at the replay again. Then, slowly he opened Liera's report. He read it. All of it. When he reached the appendix, he stopped. Read it twice. Then sat very still. For the first time in 60 years of studying war, though Val understood something he had not understood before. Theory described behavior. It did not create it. And what he had just seen had not been theoretical. It had been instinct. Conditioned. Refined. Tested. Not in simulations. In reality. Repeatedly. For longer than any conclave species had allowed itself to remember. He closed the report. Sat in silence. And waited for the next engagement. The campaign lasted 6 weeks. Though Val stopped measuring it in days sometime during the second. Time, in conflict, did not behave the way it did in peace. It compressed. Expanded. Lost its edges. What mattered was not duration, but sequence. What happened, what followed, what failed, what held. The human squadron remained. That, initially, had been a minor detail. 40 ships. A contribution. After the third engagement, it was no longer a minor detail. Coordination with them was inefficient. At first, though Val attempted to maintain standard conclave communication protocol. Structured updates. Layered intent. Position. Objective. Contingency. Human responses did not match the format. They were short. Sometimes uncomfortably so. Moving to flank. Cover our exit. They're clustering on your position. Push through. Don't wait. The first time, he requested clarification. He received it. Briefly. Impatiently, though not rudely. As if the additional explanation were unnecessary. As if the situation itself contained all required information. The second time, he adjusted his request. Simplified. Still insufficient. By the third week, he stopped asking. Not because he had adapted to their method. Because he had begun to understand it. They were not omitting information. They were sending exactly what they believed was needed. No more. No less. Assessment. Decision. Action. There was no visible gap between them. Though Val had studied that pattern. Rapid tactical cognition. Commanders who processed information at speed, who acted before deliberation could introduce delay. He had read about them. Analyzed their decisions. He had thought he understood. He had not understood. Understanding required context. Required pressure. Required consequence. Adler operated inside that space as if it were normal. As if hesitation were the anomaly. He found himself adjusting. Shortening his own transmissions. Removing unnecessary structure. trusting more. He did not like how easily that adjustment came. The engagements themselves followed no clean pattern. The CRE adapted. They were not static. They learned. Adjusted formations. Reinforced flanks. Modified approach vectors. They began anticipating conclave responses. They began anticipating human responses. And still, the humans continued to disrupt. Not by being unpredictable. By refusing to behave as damaged units should. By holding positions longer than projected. By advancing when withdrawal was optimal. By using loss not as a signal to disengage, but as a variable to be incorporated. Though Val's models degraded. Not completely, but enough. He began relying less on projection. More on observation. It was uncomfortable. In the 5th week, the situation changed. A CRE cruiser broke through the outer line. Not a failure. A gap. A moment. Exploited. The target was civilian. A transport vessel. 4,000 Salhari. Non-combatants. Minimal shielding. No escort within immediate range. Though Val saw it. Calculated. Intercept time. Too long. He began issuing orders. Reposition. Vector adjustment. Acceleration increase. He knew, as he spoke, that it would not be enough. He did not stop speaking. The human ship moved before he finished. Adler's vessel. Already damaged. 3 major hits in the previous 48 hours. By all Conclave standards, it should have been withdrawn. Repaired. Reassessed. It was still in the field. It accelerated. The sensor data flagged the velocity spike as an error. He checked. It was not an error. Power was being rerouted. Systems pushed beyond safe limits. The ship crossed his display. Positioned itself between the cruiser and the transport. Directly. No maneuver. No complexity. Though Val felt something tighten in his chest. The CRE cruiser powered weapons. No hesitation. No recognition. Just target. Fire. The human ship took the hit. The impact registered across the display. Severe. Structural compromise. Energy dispersal incomplete. Damage assessment algorithms updated. Mission capability reduced. Significantly. The human ship did not move. It held position. It returned fire. Though Val stopped issuing orders. His hands remained on the console. He watched. The algorithms updated again. Further degradation. System failures. Probability of continued effective engagement. Low. The ship disagreed. It continued. There was no change in behavior. No attempt to withdraw. No signal of distress. Just continued function. Though Val did something he had not planned. He broke formation. Accelerated. Closed distance. Not because the model indicated it was optimal. Because something in what he was seeing made not doing so unacceptable. The engagement resolved. The CRE cruiser withdrew. Damaged. The transport remained intact. 4,000 lives. Unchanged. Though Val sat in his command chair. The noise of the battle receded. Systems stabilized. Reports began to populate his display. He ignored them. For a moment. He looked at the human ship. Still operational. Barely. Held together by compensations and manual interventions. He thought about the data. The files. Liera's report. Appendix. He opened a channel. Direct. Adler answered. Her voice was tired. Not strained. Not weakened. Just used. He issued the commendation. Formal. Correct. She acknowledged it. Then he asked the question. Not required. Not procedural. Necessary. Why? The pause. Not uncertain. Just consideration. There were 4,000 people on that transport, she said. Yes, he replied. Another pause. That's usually enough. The channel closed. Though Val remained where he was. Hands still on the console. He looked down at them. At the stillness. At the absence of tremor. He had studied war for 60 years. He had known its patterns. Its logic. Its structure. He had believed that understanding it meant mastering it. He had been wrong. Understanding required more than knowledge. It required context. And context required a exposure. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes for a moment. Not long. Just enough. When he opened them, the battlefield was quieter. The immediate threat resolved. The campaign not yet over. But changed. He pulled up a new communication. Addressed it. Sent it. Did you read Appendix C? He did not expect an immediate response. He did not need one. Outside the viewport, debris drifted slowly. Fragments of ships. Traces of conflict. Evidence. And somewhere among them, a damaged vessel that had refused to stop. Though Val watched it for a long time. Then turned back to his console. And continued the work. Differently. Senna had known for 4 years. She had not told anyone. Not because it was classified. Not because it was forbidden. Because there had been no correct place to put it. Her work required distance. Every attaché was taught that from the beginning. You observe. You record. You analyze. You do not absorb. You do not allow your understanding to cross the line where it stops being objective and starts being personal. She had crossed that line sometime in her 2nd year. She did not know exactly when. There had been no single moment. Just accumulation. Small observations. Repeated. Until they formed something she could no longer separate herself from. And once she crossed it, she discovered something unexpected. It made her better at her job. Because there were things about humanity that did not exist in reports. Did not exist in data. They existed in the ordinary. In the quiet. In the parts no one thought to document because they were too small to be considered important. Except they weren't. She sat in the conclave chamber now. 93 representatives. All of them waiting. The emergency session had been ongoing for 3 days. The CRE incursion. The human intervention. The reports. The questions. No. Varric Turin stood at the center of the chamber. Older than most. Calmer than all. He looked at her. You have had sustained contact with humanity for 6 years, he said. Closer than any current representative. We would like your assessment. She looked at him. Then at the chamber. Rows of faces. Different species. Different histories. All watching. Waiting. She took a breath. All right, she said. Her voice was steady. But she felt the weight of what she was about to say. Before I answer your question, I need you to understand something. Silence. No interruption. This is not a threat assessment, she said. I'm not here to tell you whether you should be afraid of them. I'm here to tell you what they are. Because I don't think any of the formal documentation has done that properly. A slight shift in the room. Not disagreement. Tension. Focused. She nodded once. Then began. I'm going to start with something small, she said. Because that's where I started. She paused. Organizing. Not the facts. The order. The first time I understood that I didn't understand them. I was at a social gathering. A few of the representatives exchanged glances. Unexpected. They celebrate the anniversary of their births, she continued. Every year. They call it a birthday. It's excessive but harmless. A few subtle movements. Mild amusement. The child got sick. She let that sit. Nothing serious, she said. A minor infection. The kind that resolves on its own. The event was adjusted. The child was put to bed. She looked around the chamber. Both parents stayed with the child. All night. The pause. That's not unusual, she added. Not yet. She shifted slightly. The next day, I asked if this was standard. If it was a cultural ritual. She let the silence hold. The answer I received was, if your child is sick, you sit with them. She looked at the envoy who had spoken earlier. The entire night, she said. Without sleep. Then they go to work. Continue their responsibilities. Without complaint. She folded her hands lightly. They do not consider this sacrifice, she said. They consider it the minimum. The chamber was quiet. A different kind of quiet. She continued. They have a word, she said. Vigil. It means to remain with someone through the night. Originally religious. Now, practical. She glanced briefly at Turin. They sit with the sick. With the dying. with anyone who should not be alone. She paused. A species that does not sleep when something vulnerable needs them, she said softly, is not a species you categorize only by its weapons. The silence deepened. She let it, then moved on. The second thing, she said, was harder to understand. She exhaled slowly. There was an incident on a research vessel. System failure. Not fatal, but uncertain. She watched the chamber. They worked through it. Efficiently. Calmly. Exactly as expected. She tilted her head slightly. And then one of them made a joke. A ripple. Confusion. Not after, she said. During. She let the word sit. While the system was still unstable. While they were still at risk. She looked at her hands. I reviewed the audio later. It wasn't even a particularly good joke. A few subtle shifts. Attention tightening. But they laughed, she said. Not nervous laughter. Not hysteria. Real laughter. She looked back up. And then they went back to work. Silence. They do this, she said. Not always. Not everyone. But often enough that it is consistent. She stepped slightly forward. I spent months trying to understand that. Her voice lowered. What I think it is control. She let that settle. They experience fear. Fully. Completely. They understand the danger. She paused. And then they decide it doesn't get to be the only thing in the room. No one moved. They make it smaller, she said. By making it manageable. Sometimes by making it funny. She met the gaze of several representatives in turn. And then they continue. A long pause. That is useful in conflict, she said. She did not say more. She did not need to. She continued. The third thing is harder. She hesitated. Not from uncertainty. From weight. They remember they're dead, she said. She watched the chamber carefully. Publicly. Permanently. She took a breath. They build structures for it. Walls. Monuments. Entire spaces dedicated to names. She closed her eyes briefly. Then opened them. I watched a woman stand in front of one of these walls, she said. She found a name. She touched it. And then she pressed her forehead against the stone. The chamber remained silent. No one interrupted her, Senna said. No one approached. The others present understood. She let the image sit. They read the names aloud, she continued. On anniversaries. All of them. However long it takes. Her voice softened. So the dead don't become numbers. She paused. So they don't become abstract. She looked around the chamber. A species with a short lifespan cannot carry grief for long, she said. It would consume too much of their life. She gestured lightly. Humans live long enough to carry it. Her hands settled again. And they choose to. Silence. They build it into their culture, she said. Into their time. Into their memory. She took a slow breath. I need you to understand what that means. She leaned forward slightly. They know what loss costs. She let that land. And they still choose to act. A longer pause now. The room was completely still. She straightened. You're asking if they're a threat, she said. No one spoke. They saved 17 systems, she continued. They protected a transport they had no obligation to protect. Her gaze moved. They took damage they were not required to take. She looked at Turin. They did not hesitate. She looked back at the chamber. The question you're asking is whether that same capability could be turned against you. No one denied it. That's a reasonable question, she said. She nodded once. Because it could. A ripple. Subtle. But there. She did not soften it. She did not qualify it. She let it exist. You built this conclave to prevent war, she said. Because you knew what it cost. She gestured slightly. They know what it costs too. She paused. They've lived in it. A longer silence. And the first time they had to decide, in front of all of you, what they were going to do with that, they chose to protect. She let the words settle. They're not the wrath, she said quietly. A few heads shifted. They don't fight because they can't stop. She held the silence for one final moment. They fight because they decide to. She stepped back. Saturday. The chamber did not move. No one spoke. The silence stretched. Not empty. And in that silence, the question remained. Not unanswered, but transformed. No longer simple. No longer contained. And no one in the room, not even Trin, could quite reduce it back to what it had been before she spoke. The vote took less time than the silence that came before it. That, more than the outcome, was what Trin would remember. 93 representatives. 9,000 years of precedent. A system designed to move slowly, carefully, deliberately, because haste, historically, had been one of the primary causes of things that could not be undone. And yet, when the voting sequence began, there was no extended debate. No procedural delay. No attempt to defer. The question had already been answered. Not in words. In understanding. The tally resolved. 619. 228. Full membership. Not provisional. Not conditional. Not observer. Humanity had been part of the conclave for less than 2 years. The previous fastest admission had taken 4. The average was 11. Trin did not react. He recorded. That was his function. The session adjourned. Representatives left in controlled clusters, voices low, expressions measured. Some spoke quietly among themselves. Some remained silent, processing. A few looked unsettled in ways they did not attempt to conceal. The chamber emptied. Gradually. Until only the systems remained. Entrin. He stayed. He always stayed. Archival work did not end when the decision was made. It began there. He moved to the central console. Activated the final documentation sequence. The interface unfolded in familiar layers. 49 required fields. Cross-references. Treaty integrations. Status confirmations. He worked through them methodically. He always did that. No errors. No omissions. No hesitation. Species classification. The cursor blinked. Waiting. A drop-down menu. Standardized categories. Unchanged for centuries. He had used this menu 417 times. He knew every option. Every nuance. His hand moved. Stopped. He looked at the list. Minor species. Developing. Post-conflict stabilized. Non-competitive. Strategic partner. Emerging cooperative. Each one precise. Each one insufficient. He leaned back slightly. The room was quiet. The lighting had shifted to night cycle, pale blue, soft, diffused. It made the chamber feel distant. Removed. As if he were observing it rather than sitting within it. He thought about his original report. Minor species. No threat assessment required. He had not been wrong. Not exactly. The data had been accurate. The conclusions had been incomplete. He had understood the facts. He had not understood what they meant. There was a difference. A significant one. He opened the human file again. Not the official one. The private notes. He scrolled. Stopped at a single line. The chamber is not optimized for discussion. Below it, it is optimized for survival during discussion. He stared at it for a moment. Then closed the file. Opened another. Liera's report. He went directly to the appendix. Read it again. Humanity has not evolved past violence. Humanity has evolved through it. He exhaled slowly. Another file. Though Val's tactical reports. The engagement at Vethkalos. The damaged ship. Refusal to withdraw. Manual rerouting under fire. He did not read it fully. He did not need to. He already knew. He sat there. The cursor blinking. Waiting. For the first time in 4,000 years, Trin did not have a category that fit. Not approximately. Not loosely. Not at all. He closed the drop-down menu. Opened the notes field. Optional. Almost never used. He began to write. Carefully. Precisely. He wrote about the file. The brevity. The lack of performance. He wrote about the phrasing. None yet. He wrote about the chamber. For doors. Equal distance. He wrote about the timeline. Continuous conflict. No gap. He wrote about the biology. endurance, pain tolerance, adaptation. He wrote about the battle, the ship, the refusal to stop. He wrote about Senna, the vigil, the laughter, the names. He wrote about the distinction, not compulsion, decision. He paused, then added one final line. This species possesses the full capacity for sustained violence and demonstrates consistent patterns of choosing when not to use it. He read it, did not change it, saved the notes, closed the field, returned to the classification. He hesitated, then selected the closest option available. Emerging strategic partner. Assessment ongoing. It was not correct. It was acceptable. He confirmed. Saved. Finalized the file. The system processed. Completed. Turin stood. The chamber felt larger now. Or perhaps emptier. He walked toward the exit. Slowly. Not because of age. Because he always walked slowly. Movement. At the far end of the corridor, light remained. A waiting area. He almost passed it. Then paused. Movement. A human. Early in their career. Seated. A container of food on the table beside them. A data reader, inactive. They looked up. Not startled. Just aware. Long day, she said. Her voice carried no tension. Just observation. Yes, Trin replied. You're the archivist, she said. He inclined his head. You filed it. I did. She nodded. Looked back out the window. The gardens beyond were lit in amber. Warm. Quiet. Weird, isn't it? She said. He considered. What is? She gestured slightly. All of this. Being unofficial. He did not answer immediately. She continued. Feels like we're still waiting for someone to tell us we're in the wrong place. He watched her. You fought for 17 systems that were not yours, he said. You are not in the wrong place. She smiled. Well, genuine. Don't tell the council that, she said. They're still writing it up. For a moment, something unfamiliar moved at the edge of Trin's expression. Not quite a smile. Close. She picked up the container. Do you want some? She asked. It's cold, but it's good. He looked at it. Then at her. Then, without fully understanding why, he sat. What is it? He asked. Rice, she said. And some other things. My grandmother's recipe. He accepted the portion. Tasted it. Cold. Unfamiliar. They sat in silence for a while. Comfortable. Unforced. After a moment, she spoke again. Can I ask you something? Yes. She hesitated. Just slightly. Do you think this is going to work? He considered the question. Thought about the file. The classification. The absence of a correct category. Thought about the timeline. The ship. The 11 words. We would like to help. He looked at her. I don't know, he said. She nodded. Accepted that. But I think, he continued, that the answer depends more on you than on us. She considered that. Then nodded again. As if it made sense. They finished the food. He stood. Good night, he said. Good night, she replied. He walked out into the courtyard. The air was cool. The city quiet. Above, the stars were partially obscured by light. Still present. Always present. He stood for a moment. Thinking. Then moved toward his transport. Inside, he took out his personal journal. Opened it. A new page. 2 words written at the top. Humanity reclassified. Below it. Nothing. Blank. He looked at the space. Then closed the journal. Some things did not need a name immediately. Some things needed time. He leaned back in his seat. The city moved past outside. The conclave remained behind him. And for the first time in 4,000 years, Trin Vale found himself holding a thought he could not yet categorize. He did not rush to resolve it. He had time. He had always had time. And whatever humanity was, it was not going to fit into a space that had been designed before it existed.